Democrats in Illinois refusing help from President Trump as he zeroes in on Chicago after a violent holiday weekend that left dozens hurt and at least 7 dead.
Madeleine Rivera joins us live from Washington with the latest. Good morning, Maddie.
Good morning. The president has promised the administration will act quickly if Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker does not, quote, straighten things out in Chicago. We will see what he does next then after NBC Chicago reports 54 people were shot and 7 people were killed in the Windy City over Labor Day weekend. Still, Pritzker maintains there is no need for the National Guard because he says there is no emergency in Chicago. He's suggesting the president isn't even focused on crime but on something else entirely.
The other aims are that he'd like to stop the elections in 2026 or, frankly, take control of those elections. The playbook is the same. It's thwart the media. It's create mayhem that requires military interdiction. These are things that happen throughout history, and Donald Trump is just following that playbook.
Pritzker adds troops cannot legally work to enforce the law in Chicago, so Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson has an executive order limiting how much the city's police department can work with troops and federal immigration agents. The order states that Chicago police can continue to enforce state and local laws, but it will not work with the National Guard or federal agents on patrols, arrests, and immigration enforcement. Here's Johnson taking to the streets on Monday.
We're going to defend our democracy in the city of Chicago. We're going to protect the humanity of every single person in the city of Chicago. No troops in Chicago. No troops in Chicago.
The president is set to give an announcement today at 2 p.m. local time. We will see if he has anything more to say regarding his threats to step in Chicago. Lawrence Ainsley and Griff.
All right, Maddie.
Thanks, Maddie.
Thank you very much.
So I guess, Ainsley, Griff, the big question is, if you don't want the federal troops in, if you don't want the federal agents in to help you, then who's going to stop the bloodbath that are happening in all of these liberal cities? And it has nothing to do with elections. This has to do with the dignity of these children. How many times, Ainsley, did I travel around the country with Sean, going interviewing families that their kids were just murdered and no politician in the local area did anything about it?
This is all about common sense, right? You would think that you would want to clean up your city if after a Labor Day weekend, 54 people are shot. 7 people will never come home to their families again because they lost their lives. And there was a Chicago businessman, he also ran for mayor, Willie Wilson, and he said violence has been going on for so long that Democratic Party has failed the citizens of Chicago and the state of Illinois, and he supports Donald Trump's crime crackdown. And he said, I support him 1,000%. The mayor and the governor have a lot of security around them, but what about the security around the people? Greg?
Well, because cracking down on crime excuse me, is a common sense issue. And Lawrence, to your point, you've spoken to the grieving families of victims in Chicago, 57 shot over the weekend, but more than 250, I believe it's over 260 now, have been killed this year. So tell the families of those killed in Chicago that it's not needed. Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for D.C., who has had remarkable success cracking down, more than 1,500 arrests over the last 3 weeks, was talking about crime in other cities. Listen here.
President Obama to come out and make a comment on Chicago, a city that is his city, that has been one of the most violent cities in America, that has shootings and killings frequently since I can remember. Every weekend there's shootings in Chicago. What are they doing about it? What they're doing is they're turning to politics and they're turning to anything anti-Trump. You speak to any of the crime victims that I speak to, any of the parents of murdered kids and teenagers, then you'll get a sense of how disappointed people are in these leaders who'd rather play politics. And when Muriel Bowser, the Democrat mayor of D.C., can say violent crime is down by 50%, because of this surge. You want to criticize that? You want to say they don't deserve to come in and protect our people? We want our people to be victims of violent crime and we don't care about it? Shame on them.
I guess the last thing I would say on this is that I didn't predict going into the midterms and going to these governor races like Virginia or going into New York, which you got a candidate that says that he wants to defund the police, that this was going to be an election issue. I mean, it wasn't one of the top 3 issues when we were just covering the presidential race. But the reason why it's going to be an issue is because the Democrats have once again put themselves on the wrong side of something that is just like 90-10, which is public safety. Do you support law enforcement? You know, we had the Summer of Love where we defunded the police and we saw how bad it got. I don't understand why the Democrats are doubling down on this when there's a midterms approaching.
Yeah, I mean, we saw in the election, the big issue was not only the economy, but also closing the border. And now the elections going forward, this will be a big issue, crime, because we're seeing these numbers skyrocket after these weekends. And it always goes back to Chicago. And President Trump was praising Muriel Bowser for working together with him to bring the crime down in D.C. And he says her statements and actions were positive instead of others like Pritzker, Westmore, Newscomb, and the 5% approval rated mayor of Chicago, who spend all of their time trying to justify violent crime. That's the deal. They're trying to justify it. The message that we hear is we're okay with all the crime.
You're 100% right. I mean, Democrats are very much on the wrong side of so many issues, not just crime. And let's be clear, they're not ultimately, I would think, deep in their hearts, supporting crime, but yet it's Trump who is getting credit for cracking down. So at the end of the day, they want to resist Trump. But it is this doubling down on crime, doubling down on protecting illegal criminal aliens that is becoming such a problem for Democrats, particularly like in Virginia. Abigail Spanberger, a moderate Democrat who is a little bit ahead in the lead, but she's going to have to confront those issues. You've got in New Jersey, the race there, very close. Mikey Sherrill, a moderate, who's going to have trouble defending these issues.
So at least 56 people were shot in Chicago over Labor Day weekend, with 8 victims dying. The president calling out Democrat lawmakers trying to, quote, justify violent crime instead of working with the administration to eliminate it. Meanwhile, Chicago's mayor and Illinois governor continue to stand against any plans of sending in the National Guard. Watch.
No federal troops in the city of Chicago. No militarized force in the city of Chicago. We're going to defend our democracy in the city of Chicago. We're going to protect the humanity of every single person in the city of Chicago.
We hope that they don't send any troops along with ICE. And if they do, they'll be in court pretty quickly because that is illegal.
Let's bring in Fox News legal analyst Gregg Jarrett. So, Greg, the Democrats are making this a process issue, but they're not really focusing on the victim. So in yesterday's show, we got the shooting numbers, and it went up. And also the deaths went up by 1 as well. And then if you look over last Labor Day weekend, it almost doubled. So there's clearly an epidemic going on in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mayor and the governor are siding with lawlessness and disorder simply because the president's in favor of law and order. And by law, you know, the president does have the power to federalize the National Guard, send them into cities like Chicago to suppress civil disorder, enforce federal laws, even if Governor Pritzker resists. Johnson is irrelevant in such matters. And the president can also deploy other armed forces because the Constitution gives the commander-in-chief inherent powers, Article 2, to ensure that all laws are faithfully executed. Beyond that, though, the Insurrection Act, passed by Congress, specifically allows the president to use the military to address law enforcement emergencies, halt domestic violence, particularly where governors and mayors refuse to do it. Trump did it in Los Angeles. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a liberal-leaning court, upheld his decision as completely lawful. And, of course, it quelled the violence. So, you know, that doesn't mean Pritzker isn't going to sprint to the nearest court to get an injunction. He'll do it. But the law is squarely on the president's side on this, Lawrence.
The progressives here continue to talk about the numbers, and they celebrate them. The numbers were so high before that they celebrate some decreases. So this is what we're seeing. Murder is down by 49%. It's down by 49%, but we just had 8 people die over the weekend. Robbery is down 10%. Burglary is up 8%. Felony theft is up 46%, misdemeanor theft, 60%, motor vehicle theft, 78%. And many of them are juvenile. So they celebrate these numbers. But if there were 8 people that died over the weekend, what were the numbers before then?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. You know, look, Pritzker and Johnson should really follow the lead, the template of Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., who is now cooperating because she saw the dramatic drop in crime in Washington, D.C. And in fact, she held a news conference and celebrated. She praised the infusion of law enforcement to help. And of course, the happiest people weren't just the innocent victims of crime, but law enforcement that desperately needed the help. Pritzker and Johnson should try to pay attention.
Yeah. I want to get your comments on another story when we talk about the lawfare as well as the courts. And this is the federal appeals court that struck down President Trump's tariffs, arguing that it goes too far in its use of emergency powers. The question is, where is the Supreme Court going to fall on this? Because I can predict that it's going to make its way there, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Lawrence. The appellate court vacated the injunction, so that stops. That had stopped the Trump tariffs. So that gives him time to appeal to the Supreme Court. So the tariffs in the interim will continue until there is a decision sometime later next year. But most importantly, Trump does have a valid argument that he acted lawfully under the Economic Powers Act, because the staggering trade deficits, the foreign tariffs, were punishing our budget, our national debt, and that created an extraordinary threat to the economy. That is the exact language of the law that Congress passed back in '77, delegating powers to the president to regulate imports. And judicial review of presidential discretion in emergencies, according to the Supreme Court, is quite limited, particularly in foreign affairs. Regardless of all that, Lawrence, there are other laws that Trump can invoke to maintain his tariffs, the Trade Act, the Smoot-Hawley Act. So writing the obituary of Trump's new tariffs is a bit premature. I wouldn't hit the panic button quite yet on the demise of these tariffs.
I just worry the president is not only using this from an economic standpoint, but to strike peace deals all across the world. He's using it as a defense mechanism as well. This is how Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, weighed in on this as well. This is what he had to say. Let's watch it.
We think we're going to win at the Supreme Court. And if you think about it, there are two parts here. There's the fentanyl tariffs. And what's a bigger emergency than 100,000, 200,000 Americans dying? And shouldn't the president be able to use IEPA, the Emergency Economic Powers Act, to stop the hundreds of thousands of Americans dying and the families that are being destroyed?
Greg, last word.
Yeah, he's 100% correct. Presidents have used in the past emergency powers to protect citizens and national security threats. I can't think of a greater threat than the hundreds of thousands who have lost their lives, particularly young people, because of the influx of fentanyl over the Mexican and Canadian borders. So the president was right to act on this.
Yeah. Gregg Jarrett, always great on these topics. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Lauren.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.